Well, welcome back to the Small Business Mindset. I know every episode we try to dive into a little segment of business and we try to put together those tools and tactics we hope you'll be helpful as you run your business throughout the year. And especially this year, as we're in the thick of tax season. And I know a lot of my friends and colleagues in the industry, and my guest today is definitely someone that's in the thick of it right now. But I know understanding finance is probably one of the most important things we can do as small business owners. So I am pleased to have on the podcast today Lauren Colson. Lauren is a CPA and is the founder and CEO of Colson Strategies. So Lauren, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lauren, if you want to take a minute, because we just recently met, could you give our listeners and our viewers just a little bit of background as far as who you are, how your firm works, and what you're all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is in finance and accounting, started in corporate finance, large publicly traded companies, and got a lot of experience, but didn't feel a real passion until I moved to a startup company, and just loved the energy, loved the team and the spirit, and was like, okay, this is where I need to be. And so built out the financial infrastructure and really saw that this company who was successful wasn't using their financial data to make the best decisions for the business. And while they had seen success, it was like, well, watch what happens when we can use that data to drive the go forward strategy. And that is where my passion truly came out, is using the numbers to make good decisions. And so from there, I was like, I think I'm going to take this to more businesses. So I started in May of 2020. And since then, it started out as just me as a fractional CFO doing financial strategy for small to medium-sized businesses. And we grew into a team, and we now do everything from bookkeeping, so your day-to-day recording transactions, paying bills, sending invoices, processing payroll, to controller work, which is more higher level accounting for the larger growing businesses, up to CFO, financial strategy, forward looking. So we've got everything from what has happened, and we help you look at it and help project what will happen.
I love it. Thanks for that explanation. And I love the fact that you're a startup entrepreneur too.
Yes. I feel a lot of the pains, trust me.
I think I think we're going to remember this, or maybe our next generation, when they look back in history and be like, what changed during the 2020s, and what happened with business and people and lifestyle and the way we work. And I'm always so fascinated to hear about other entrepreneurs that realized something and realized a need for something within their industry and decided to put those strengths into motion. So yeah, thanks for sharing your story. That's really cool. So I think what I most wanted to talk to you about today, which is interesting, is it's a topic that you shared with me as far as something that you like to speak on and like to educate your clients on, and it's the biggest mistakes business owners make when it comes to money. And I know that I like to encourage people to think about, what are you expert in? What are your expert strengths in? And a lot of times it's not money, however
Yeah.
much you think you manage it, or whether you do it simply or complexly or whatever. And so I love to tap into people and resources like yourself that help us walk through that and tell us what we don't know. So can you kind of guide us on a journey of what this conversation looks like? What are the biggest mistakes that business owners make?
Yeah, I'll start out with what I see is the most prevalent one, and that's not knowing their numbers. And so I hear a lot of times from entrepreneurs that they get their financial statements in their inbox from their bookkeeper, their CPA, whoever's preparing them, and they don't look at them because they're scared, because maybe it wasn't a good month, or it hasn't been a good year, or they're not sure what to look at. So they're not looking at them. And so without having that data, as I talked about earlier, it's really hard to make the best decisions for your business. So I think a lot of people are looking at, okay, well, I've got cash in my bank account, I'm good, I see it going up, and that's kind of how it's being managed. But there's so much power in knowing your numbers in growing your business, right? So it's down from, what does revenue look like? What does your gross margin look like? What is your net income? All the way down to, how is the performance of your different product and service lines? And knowing that detailed information helps you make those decisions. For example, wow, I'm really not making much money selling this product. I should just scrap it and take our time and energy into this, more profitable selling product. And those are the things, if you're not looking at it and living and knowing your numbers, you can't see and you can't make those types of decisions.
Funny that you bring that up because I think it's very common, and I'll even call myself out. It's hard sometimes when you've done it the way you've always done it, and it's not failing, but it's not thriving. And it's
Yeah,
really hard
right.
to take a step back and look at that and saying, I need to discontinue this lane because it's really not bringing me the success I want to, but look at this over here. And your finances are a fantastic way to look at that. And so another thing I thought about too, when I work with clients, I think a lot of times, and it's even hard to admit to ourselves, I think as small business owners, especially if you're a one person shop or have a very small team, and maybe you haven't worked with a CPA before, and maybe you're managing things in house, maybe you're using a QuickBooks program or something like that, something more simple. I think a lot of my clients that are in that position, they tend to look at income as what they need for their lifestyle and not necessarily what they need to run their business, and
Right.
really differentiating between, okay, what is my lifestyle need? Because sometimes I think if businesses have a windfall and they have a great year or a great quarter or a great month, they're like, "Ooh, I can go shopping." I'm like,
Right.
that's really the position that I need to be in. So can you talk about that a little bit as far as what's the difference and how you should make spending decisions, especially as the owner of the business, from your success or lack thereof of your business?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I'll say, circles back to knowing your numbers as well. Because if you have a successful quarter, that may not be indicative of what's happening in the future. That could be some one off situation, that could be seasonality for your business. So, understanding, is this going to continue happening? Is this what our profit looks like now? Or is this a one time thing? And then understanding, okay, do I need to save some of this cash or do I need to reinvest this into the future growth? Like, what are our, if growth is part of your goals, which we always start out and say, what are your goals? Are you trying to grow the business? Are you trying to pay yourself more? Are you trying to sell? What is your plan? But understanding, okay, what does that look like? And how do we use that cash to the best ability? Maybe it is pay yourself more because you deserve it. I mean, part of the reason we start a business is so that we can give ourselves that freedom and of time and dollar, right? But understanding, what does that mean for the future, and what do your cash flows look like? So understanding, we love using financial projections, so mapping out the next 12 months and understanding what that looks like. Another piece of that is, I think revenue is so, that number alone is so glorified and so sexy of, I want to hit 7 figures, right? But it's not always associated with, well, what's the cost to get there, right? Because if you're making $1 million in revenue, but it's costing you, $975,000 to earn that revenue,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe that's not worth your time and energy. And so understanding those levers to pull.
That's great advice. And what would you give advice? So let's put a hat on. Let's pretend we're both starting our business today. We're startup entrepreneurs and we're getting started. What advice would you give somebody in that realm? How much cash should you have in reserves at all time? And this maybe won't change as they get going, but I mean, is there a certain, like, you should have 25% in cash reserves? Is there a common denominator with all this?
Kind of. And it really depends what industry you're in, because some industries, you're outlaying a lot of cash before you're getting any in. So in that case, you want to have more reserves of cash so that you can pay your bills until the monies from your clients or customers come in. Some industries, you get prepaid, so you have more cash. I'd say a minimum of like 2 to 3 months of your operating expenses is like a decent marker, sometimes more, sometimes less.
Yeah.
Um, I also think that if you've got a firm grip on your numbers and what your plan is, then it's never a bad idea to leverage a loan or a line of credit or some other capital infusion to help fund your growth or get you started. I think a lot of bootstrap business owners sometimes think of that as failure if they have to bring in money. But really, that is just one of the tools that you can use to help your cash flow. If you've got, peaks and valleys in terms of money coming in, that can help get you through as long as you're, you're managing it appropriately.
I'm glad you brought up line of credit because that's even something I've used for my business. I mean, I'm a commission-based sales. And so understanding, the ebbs and flows of the market and when my paychecks come in, because, I talk to other agents in my industry, especially people that are thinking about getting into real estate. It's like, you might not get a paycheck for 6 months at all. I'm like, is that going to work for you and your responsibilities? I'm like, and so tapping into or having a line of credit at the ready that you can utilize to float 30, 60, 90 days if you need to. So when those checks come in, you can manage it too. So yeah, that's great advice. So
Yeah.
what are some things that you commonly see? Maybe common isn't a great word to use, but as you work with your clients, you're like, if they only paid more attention to this would help them create more income or have more balanced budget or be more profitable.
Absolutely. So one of the big things we see is business owners being the bottleneck in their business, and it really prohibits their growth. So for example, they're doing 5 different tasks that really aren't their area of expertise and they shouldn't be doing. They should be outsourcing it to a third party or bringing on a team member to take it over so that they can focus on the seat of the CEO, right? So if that's sales or strategy, and seeing this is hard. It's a hard thing. Letting other people do it because it'll never be the exact way that you do it. But that's been a huge part where it's like we map out strategies, but yet the progress is so slow because they're bogged down by all of these tasks that they don't need to be doing. And so that's a big one where we try to, and it's a lot of kind of, we call ourselves on the CFO like therapists almost, to be like, you can do this, you got this. Let's delegate this out and focus your time here so we can actually execute on these strategies much faster. Or we give you time back to spend more time with your family, your friends, reading that book you want to read, and taking away the path that leads to burnout when you're doing everything.
Gosh, that's great advice. And I know I've even taken that advice for myself and my own company. And I ask clients a lot too, if you think about, and we don't get into the individual tactics like you do. Obviously, I'm not a CPA, but also asking yourself, like, okay, if you really had to back it up, how much is your time worth? How much do you make an hour? So if you generate $1 million a year in income, what does that mean per hour? That's a big number.
Right.
Even the net number is a big number. And I always ask people, I'm like, would you pay somebody else $500 an hour, for example, to do that task? And a lot of times I get like, oh my gosh, no, I would never do that. I'm like, then, but you're paying
Yeah,
yourself to do that. And it's a hard thing to let go on because I think, a lot of times the reason why businesses are successful, especially with founders and startup entrepreneurs, is because they got in the trenches and did all the thing. And it's hard to let go of that. And it's also, I think, hard to admit too. I'm glad you brought up the word therapist because, quantifying people's time, it's hard to put a number on it. It's hard to say if you could have your evenings back or your Saturday mornings back, what would you give for that? What's that worth to you? And,
right.
if they can put a number behind it, you're like, you know what? I know I recently hired a new staff person to assist me with my firm, and she has the title of communications director, but it took me a while to get to the point where I would feel comfortable hiring her, and she's phenomenal. But I'm like, but I look at the expense that I'm giving, and it was like, okay, I'm gonna do it, and I'm so glad I did because you're right. It wasn't until she's been on board for a few weeks that I realized the amount of time I now have back in my day to focus on those income producing activities that I wasn't able to do before.
Absolutely. And you don't want to sacrifice your long-term profit for your short-term profit. There it is.
Yeah.
So we often think, well, if I do it myself, then I'm saving the salary benefits of having an employee or the cost of outsourcing it. But that's a temporary problem. And as you attempt to grow and make more money, your time is the one thing that we all only have 24 hours, no matter what you do or how much money you have, right? And so you can only do so much. And so, yes, you may bring someone on and see your profits decline, but then that ROI is coming because your time is better spent in the income producing area. So you got to give it time, and you're essentially making that investment in your business, but in yourself, knowing, okay, this is what my time is worth. And a lot of that's mindset too. Like, and I'm best spent over here. And heck, that person's probably going to do that job better than I am because I don't even like doing it.
Yes. And they probably do. And they're going
Right.
to
And they
do it
love it.
faster and
So it's
better. And I'm
perfect.
like, what a novel idea. It's hard to get out
Right.
of our own way sometimes. It really, really is to give up control. Because I think you thought, I built it, I created it. I mean, it's my baby and I don't want to let go of it because I know how to do it. And it's hard. I mean, I'll raise my hand. It's hard to trust people and to bring
Yeah.
them on the way. But
Recovering control freak. I get it. But you got to make progress in it. And I've done it for my business and it's been huge.
that's fantastic. So okay, so if you let's flip our hats a little bit more. So we're a startup business and we're making sure we're controlling costs and looking at cash reserves and making sure we're on stable ground. So now we're growing. We've been in business 3 to 5 years and we're ready to take that next step and expand. What should we be thinking about at this stage in our business growth cycle from a financial capacity?
Yep. So if you're growing, you've got a baseline of what your sales, your operating looks like. Maybe you have a healthy profit number, you're looking to growing that. You should definitely be putting together, whether it's yourself, it doesn't have to be fancy, or working with a CFO, financial projections to understand what that growth looks like. And you want to have essentially drivers behind your revenue assumptions, right? So if you're going to be saying, okay, we're going to grow revenue by 50% year over year, don't just say that, don't just say, okay, we're going to add 1 million. Where is that coming from? And how are you getting there? And what are the costs to get there? And that's what you really should be thinking about from any stage of your business. But I think as you continue to grow and you have more financial data and information, it becomes a little bit easier because you can know, okay, we're going to, do a launch and we're going to get these many clients through that, which is going to generate this amount of revenue. And we're going to have to bring on, 2 more team members to service that. So that's the added cost. And what does that profit look like? So that you're measuring out, okay, here's what I expect. And this is what I need to reach that number versus just picking a number and being like, hope we get there. So it's having more of that strategic plan. Something I always tell business owners is get it out of your head. So put it on paper, right? Because I think we hold a lot of things in our head. The strategy, our numbers, like, oh, okay, I know how much I made this month because I had 10K come in, I had these costs. All right, cool, I'm at $5,000. When really it's hard to think about everything, especially in terms of numbers that's happening until you put it down on paper and map it out and you're like, oh, I actually made more money than I thought, or a lot less because I wasn't considering XYZ. And having that transparency right in front of you is so important to really see and speak to you and use that as a tool.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh yeah, that's great advice. I would also say that, really people that even make a strategy and make a plan for stuff like that, it's also thinking about like how can you make sure you're cognizant of your expenses. So what common expenses do you see clients have and businesses have that maybe shouldn't be necessary, that you're like, you know not just trimming back and being more resourceful, but also like unnecessary expenses that you see maybe pop up on somebody's balance sheet. You're like, why are you doing this? What is that even something that's purposeful for your business?
Yeah. So a lot of times we see clients' software costs out of control.
Oh, interesting.
And so they're signing up for everything. And I think that it can be small, but it adds up because it's like a free trial for a month. And then they start billing you and you're not paying attention and looking at your numbers. And all of a sudden, this number's growing. Or if you have kind of a bigger team and they're adding softwares and then it's like evaluating, are you even using these?
Right. Right.
So for some of our larger clients, we do an annual exercise where we scrub their software costs and say, do we need this? Are we using this? Is this having a benefit?
Right. Oh,
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
so that's a big one we see. Lots of kind of frivolous costs where it's like, oh, well, we're taking all these people out to dinner and we're doing, all of these events and entertainment, which can definitely be a great, strategy for your business. But I always challenge people to really like look at the ROI. So if that's a big line item on your P&L, is that turning into anything? Are you getting clients from this? Are you strengthening the relationship, or is this just money you're kind of blowing? So making sure that there's really an ROI that you're doing. Conferences can be another thing, especially if you have a team and you're just sending all of these people to conferences. Like, are they really getting something out of it? Is it, are you really establishing, bringing your brand to the conference, or are we just going to conferences? So those are things that can kind of like get a little bit out of control if you're not watching them.
Yeah, no, that's great advice to put into play. I mean, I haven't thought about some of those things. Absolutely. And sometimes it is hard to quantify ROI on marketing or those type of things too. But you're right, on a, especially on an annual basis, evaluating like where are we spending money and how is it moving the dial forward? Is this important to us or not? And what's working? It's hard to that. I know in my previous career, I was in banking and I did business development. And a lot of times as we track our activities, thankfully on a banking side, we had tons of numbers to be able to quantify that. But I would say I was able to look at the numbers, and I'm glad we're having this conversation today, to quantify my time. So if I'm spending money, either sponsoring an event or time with a certain, corporate client, then I want to see those accounts come in and I want to see deposits go up and loans go up. And sometimes it's funny, over time, I got a system down where like, okay, typically I visit this one client and it takes about 30 to 60 days for me to see it. And I want to correlate that with, I was out there promoting a car loan promotion. Well, did my car loans go up in that area and by how much? And using those numbers to figure out absolutely where I spent my time, because sometimes you wouldn't get anything and other times you would. You're like, what was different about that? And really analyze that. That's really, really great
Exactly.
advice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to dumb it down a little bit. And I do this with my own CPA. I'm like, talk to me like I'm four.
Yeah.
Bare bones it. So business owners operating a small business, what are those basic things? And I'm going to pretend like they don't work with the CPA, because there's plenty of my clients that don't. They don't feel like they're at that level, and I think everyone is at that level. Just to clarify, I think they need that level of advice. I think they're scared too because they're worried about the cost and what that means and want to commit to something. But if you can say, okay, you need to pay attention to these 5 things. You need to make sure you're on track for these things in your business. What would those things be?
Absolutely. So on the P&L, which is one of your financial statements, you want to be looking at your revenue. And I think that's the easiest, most obvious one that most people have down. That's what you're getting for selling your product or your service.
And I'm going to dumb it down even further. P&L is profit and loss.
Oh, yes. Yes.
That's okay.
Thank you. P&L, profit and loss, also
Profit
called
loss.
an income statement. We give it lots of different names, all the same thing. Yes, exactly. So your revenue, how much money you're bringing in for the month, products or services.
Yep.
Your cost of goods sold is the cost it takes you to create that revenue. So if you are a product-based business and you sell water bottles, your cost of goods sold is the cost of the water bottle, the lid, the label, shipping it to you. Those are your cost of goods sold. And when you take your revenue minus your cost of goods sold, you get your gross profit. And that essentially means your profit just from selling your product or your service before you consider paying yourself, your office, your software, any of that. And so that is how much money it takes to bring in $1 of revenue, right? So we take our gross profit, we divide it by revenue, and that gives us our gross margin. Okay. And so let's say it's 50%. That means for every dollar of revenue that I bring in, it costs me 50 cents to get it.
So that water bottle you sold for $1, it took you 50 cents to produce it. You just made a profit of 50 cents. Yeah,
exactly. So you need to understand what your gross margin percentage is. Depending on your business or industry, this can flux month to month if you're selling different priced products or services. So understanding what causes that. And then this is kind of what we were talking about earlier of maybe you have a lower performing product that it's just worth scrapping. Maybe it brings in $1 million, but the cost of it to produce it, send it is just too much that it's not worth the time and the effort. And that's where you can kind of dive in there. From there, and I'm moving down the profit and loss here. Yes. You want to have a firm understanding of what your operating expenses are. So what are you spending and we've kind of been talking about this throughout our time here. Where's all your other money going? software tools, rent if you have an office, meals and entertainment, salaries and benefits if you have a team, contractor expense, like understand and really utilize. And I'd say at least quarterly, do a deep dive of, is this what we need? Is there any way that we can lean down, or is there any more expense that we can put on to help us grow? It's not always a you don't always have to reduce your expense to gain profitability. It's a give or take, right? In terms of what can drive revenue. And so that's your operating expenses. And then at the very bottom of our profit and loss is our net income. So that's basically taking revenue minus all of your expenses. And that is your essential profit at the end of the day.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for explaining it that way. I think it's kind of a basic, outline of here's where you start and here's where you get. And I think one of the other things I always like to encourage my clients to consider, if they have a team, it's easy, I think, to put in those payroll expenses. But if it's just them, I think sometimes they forget to pay themselves.
Yeah.
And so, and that's where, early on, I talked about the lifestyle conversation. It's like when they get to the bottom, they get to that totally net number and they're like, oh, that's what I make. That's my take home pay. And that's not always the case. So I just want to, make sure they're mindful of that too. So yeah. Lauren, I want to thank you for your time today. What's the best way for us to get a hold of you and connect with you?
Yeah, so you can visit our website, colsonstrategies.com. That's COLSON. We've got a way to reach out to us on there. I love LinkedIn. You can DM me, Lauren Colson, on LinkedIn, or you can reach out via email at info@colsonstrategies.com.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure to include in the show notes all your contact information. But I just want to say thank you for joining us today and providing some fantastic strategies for clients and listeners to implement into their business. So thanks again.
Thanks so much for having me. It was awesome.